Imagine that you're stuck in some twisted dystopian future. There are billions of lottery balls in massive silos, and your life depends on drawing just one specific ball. And if you don't pull the one ball you need, it's game over. And you couldn't just draw it once, you'd have to pull it at least 3 times in a row. Now, if you actually drew the right one 3 times in a row, you wouldn't be sitting there thinking, wow, what luck. You'd probably be thinking, somehow, this lottery must have been rigged for me. That is what fine-tuning is.
Sure, and I love this video, love the cartoons, and I agree that the fine-tuning argument is probably the most interesting and intellectually stimulating of all the proofs for God, although I still don't think it works. But let's go.
The universe feels rigged in our favor because the odds of getting all the right conditions for a life-permitting universe by chance are absurdly small.
Okay, that's according to some physicists. I have seen others who say there is actually a lot more latitude in the values of these constants, but I am not a physicist myself, so I guess we'll just go with whatever information you have.
It's way more plausible that someone set it up just right.
No, it's not. That's something you have to demonstrate. There are a lot of ways to rig a lottery, so it's reasonable to assume that highly unlikely results derive from such rigging, but we don't have the faintest idea of whether or how anyone or anything can rig a universe, so we can't say what the chances of that might be. We're just making a false analogy.
Here are some of the most wild examples of fine-tuning. First of all, there's the gravitational constant. If gravity were even slightly stronger or weaker, by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, stars wouldn't form properly, and without stars, there's no life. It's like having a billion dice and them all landing on 6. The cosmological constant. This governs the expansion of the universe. If it were just a fraction different, by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, the universe would either collapse on itself or expand too rapidly for galaxies to form. Both scenarios equal no life. The strong nuclear force. This holds the nuclei of atoms together. If it were just 2% stronger or weaker, no stable elements would exist. The electromagnetic force. If this force were even slightly off, atoms couldn't hold together. Forget about water, carbon, or any building blocks for life.
Yes, a lot of these variations do sound incredibly small, although physicists disagree, like I said, on the exact numbers. But still, many do sound incredibly small. But here's the problem. Incredibly small compared to what? We have no idea what the possible ranges for these values might be. If you imagine that these fundamental constants could be anything at all, then sure, this sounds incredibly fine-tuned. But imagine that you have a constant whose value is measured to be 1. If the value is more than 1.001, then toilet bowls don't flush. If it's less than 0.999, then toilet bowls don't flush. Call it the universal flush constant. So a change of 1 part in 1,000 would make toiletry impossible. That constant seems fine-tuned for toilets, sure. But what if the flush constant actually can only adopt a range of 0.998 to 1.002? Values outside this range are actually impossible because of physical constraints that we don't know about yet. Then it no longer looks fine-tuned at all. In fact, fully 50% of the range of the flush constant is consistent with effective toiletry. So this all hangs on what values of these constants are actually possible, and we don't really know that, so far as I understand. Nothing stops us from imagining that these values could be anything at all, but we don't know that's true. And there's no basis for assuming it to be true either.
Now, there are plenty of other examples of fine-tuning, but I think you get the idea. Now, to use another illustration, imagine that you're playing poker and someone pulls a royal flush. You'd probably be thinking, wow, that's a pretty lucky break. But what if they hit a royal flush again and again, say a dozen times in a row? You're not thinking luck anymore. You're thinking the dealer and the player are definitely in cahoots.
Sure, because this is the kind of thing you know people can do. People deceive each other all the time by primitive or sophisticated methods.
This same deal goes with the universe.
No, it doesn't, because you don't know anything at all about how these parameters came about. This is like saying you saw an unlikely pile of stones. Chances are low that would happen naturally, but you know a kid could do that, so that was probably a kid's pile of stones. But if you see a mountain with an unlikely shape, you can't go ahead and say that a kid did that. You don't know of any kid who could possibly do that. That hypothesis is just not available. And in the case of the universe, you have no available hypotheses. If you are going to say that something was done by a being that could do that kind of thing, then you have to provide some evidence that there is a being who can do that kind of thing.
It's way more likely that someone rigged it, and that points straight to design, which sure sounds a lot like God.
Sounds like which god? I've read about a lot of gods, and I don't recall any of them futzing with constants and parameters to get things just right. And in fact, if you believe in creatio ex nihilo, the gods couldn't have done that futzing because there was nothing to futz. Fine-tuning only makes sense if there is something that can be futzed. There has to be some pre-existing physics or reality independent of God that exists to be adjusted. Otherwise, the entire concept of tuning is meaningless. And also, if you're getting your information about God from something like, say, Genesis, then it's all backwards. Life already exists by the time the stars are created, so creation has nothing to do with parameters and such being just right. So no, it doesn't sound like any God that I know of from the Bible, at least. Are you proposing some other gods? On top of that, the idea of a being clever enough to tweak cosmic parameters in just the right way to create life just does not seem consistent with the God of religion who can't figure out any reliable way to communicate with humanity, let alone a God who is fixated on people burning animals in his honor, destroying petty warlords, and so on. And finally, a being that could adjust parameters in the way that you imagine would have to be at least as complex as what he was designing, to have at least as many parameters himself. Not only does this render this being as some sort of composition or conglomeration itself, but it opens the question of why that being has the parameters and constitution that it does. Or if you prefer, what are the circumstances and environment that compel that being to create a universe with stars, if that's what the constants are deliberately being adjusted for? This just gives you something else to investigate, not to worship.
Now, a skeptic might say, sure, it seems unlikely that our universe would support life if it were the result of some random physical processes. But because we exist, we can't observe a universe that doesn't allow life. So really, the fact that we're here shows that it wasn't really all that improbable at all, even if it was just a cosmic accident. This is called the anthropic objection, or as I like to call it, the objection that proves way too much. Here's why it falls apart. Imagine you're standing in front of a firing squad. You got a hunch that your cousin who's in the squad might have convinced everybody to miss. Shots are fired, and you're still standing. It's pretty clear that this wasn't luck. The fact that you survived is strong evidence that they intended to miss.
Well, you can analyze the probabilities and actually figure out what the likelihood is under each scenario, but what's the point?
Now, the anthropic objection would say, well, hold on, you can only observe this situation because you survived, so your survival wasn't improbable at all.
No, the anthropic principle just says that if you exist, your environment must be consistent with your existence. I don't think that it really addresses your prior probabilities at all. It's just a conditional probability. Given that you exist, the probability that the environment is compatible with your existence is 1. So, in your firing squad example, it would be something like this. Given that you existed at every moment from before the firing squad until after, you can conclude that at all moments the environment was compatible with your existence. I kind of think that's all it gives you. The anthropic principle doesn't tell you how likely it is that we are here. It just says that once we're here, we can't be surprised that we're in an environment that supports our existence.
Even if they were trying to kill you. Bruh. But obviously, this is sheer nonsense. If they kept firing and kept missing, it's not luck. It's evidence that something else is going on.
Sure, but I don't see what that has to do with the anthropic principle. That would just tell you that once you know you're alive, the environment will be one that is compatible with your being alive.
The same goes for the universe. The fact that we're here points to design, not some cosmic dice roll.
Well, you have to argue that. Evolution provides an explanation for how organisms came to be as they are without any cosmic dice roll. We have a pretty good idea of how organic compounds came into being without a cosmic dice roll as well. So, if you want to say that the existence of stars and galaxies can only be due to design, you have to argue that. You can't just claim it. And if you proved it could only be design, all that would get you is a designer who loves stars and galaxies. Nothing more.
Now, similar to this objection is the so-called puddle analogy, a favorite among online atheists. Meet Doug, our philosophical puddle. Doug's impressed because his shape fits perfectly into the hole that he's in. But what Doug doesn't get is that, as a puddle, he's literally just molding to whatever hole he lands in. Change the hole, Doug reshapes himself. Now, some skeptics use this to argue that life in the universe is like Doug the Puddle. They say, of course life fits into this universe because we're here. If the universe were different, we just wouldn't exist to notice.
Well, I've never heard the argument go quite like that. Usually I think it's just to explain the apparent suitability of living organisms to their environments, which it does quite nicely. Evolution molds organisms to their environments like gravity molds a liquid to its container. I never saw the analogy as going much beyond that.
This analogy flops hard. Life's not some fluid that'll fit in any old universe. Life demands ridiculously specific conditions.
That's debatable. We don't know all possible forms of life in the universe. We extrapolate from what we see here on Earth, which is all ultimately derived from the same lineage.
Tweaking even a small thing, like the mass of an electron or quark, and boom, no stars, no planets, no chemistry, no life, a totally dead universe.
Didn't you go through that already?
Doug the Puddle can survive any hole, but life can't without a universe that's precisely dialed in. Now, the most well-known objection might be the multiverse. Essentially, it says, sure, our universe looks finely tuned, but what if there are billions or even infinite universes? Most of them might be duds, but in one of them, namely ours, the constants just happen to be right for life. It's like saying if you buy enough lottery tickets, you're bound to win eventually, but there's a lot of problems here. For starters, there's just no evidence at all for the multiverse.
Well, I'd say at the outset it's about the same evidence as there is for a cosmic designer. Both are speculative until you can get some evidence.
It's pure speculation at this point. We can't observe other universes, measure them, or even know if they exist.
Kind of like a cosmic designer.
Second, it multiplies the problem instead of solving it. The multiverse theory needs something to produce all these universes, like a universe generator, but that generator would also have to be fine-tuned to create life-permitting universes.
I don't follow you there. Why do you need a generator, and why does it have to be fine-tuned? The whole idea is that you don't need fine-tuning if you have infinite universes. Infinite universes give you infinite sets of parameters with no tuning. I'm not following you here.
So all you've done at this point is just kick the can down the road.
I'd actually say that problem is much worse with the cosmic designer theory, because there you definitely have a single entity that has certain very particular properties. Why does it have those properties and not some others? I think saying that, in fact, you actually have all properties playing out simultaneously, in parallel, in multiple universes, begs that question much less. You don't have the question of why there are some specific properties, because there aren't. There are all properties.
One really lame response to the design argument is to point out that the vast majority of the universe is totally hostile to life, so this place just really isn't so fine-tuned after all.
I don't think it's that bad an argument, although it's more suggestive than conclusive. It's just an argument from contradiction. Assume that there is a cosmic designer who wanted life and had the power to make that happen in any manner he saw fit. Why would such a being make a vast, lifeless environment that would take billions of years to produce life in one tiny little corner? The conclusion is, that's an unlikely scenario.
But this genius take misses the point. We're not asking why Earth has water and air. We're asking why this entire universe has the precise fundamental constants that it does. Let's not forget, the vast size of the universe isn't some pointless cosmic flex. Universes that are smaller and denser would collapse upon themselves. So no, the fact that you just can't hit the gritty on the rings of Saturn doesn't exactly crush the fine-tuning argument.
But actually, I think it's you who are missing the point, because this really depends on how you think about your fine-tuner. If you imagine the fine-tuner making precise adjustments to parameters to get just the right kind of universe, this forces you to explain the characteristics and origin of the parameter space as well as the characteristics and origins of the fine-tuner, who fine-tuned the fine-tuner, and so on. But if you imagine that the creator created everything, including the parameter space, the constants of nature, the laws of physics, and everything, then there's no reason at all that you would need billions of light years of empty space just to have life here on Earth. There simply are no physical constraints on what such a creator can create. So the argument from the hostility of the universe to life is actually reasonably compelling in my view. A genuinely all-powerful creator has no constraints and could have made any universe compatible with any life. The end. There's simply no argument to be made that it needed to be this way or that way in order for life to prosper. It could have been any way the creator wanted with no restrictions whatsoever. Since we have a universe that is generally incompatible with life as we know it, we should suspect that there is no such all-powerful creator that desired the existence of life. That leaves us either with no creator or with a creator who is working within some pre-existing framework, like a programmer working with some pre-existing language. We might ask that programmer, why is your app taking up so much memory? And he's going to answer, because that's the only way you can build that app using that language. So then our next question is, well, who made that stupid language, and why are apps written in that language taking up so much space? Same here. We ask, why is the universe so huge and so hostile to life? If you say, because that's the only way you can build a universe for life given the existing physics, then the next question is going to be, who made those physics and why are those physics so messed up? And I think the objection from the hostility of the universe to life also brings out the question of what the universe is actually fine-tuned for, if it is indeed fine-tuned at all. What is the universe really good at doing? Making life? No. Making stars? Yes. And so we're back to a universe that's fine-tuned for stars, if anything.
Now, another common response is to say that this is just God of the gaps. You're just saying, I don't know, God did it.
Yeah, it kind of is.
But no, the fine-tuning argument isn't about throwing up our hands and saying magic. Let's think about this in terms of probability. What we're asking is, what's the probability that an intelligent designer created the universe, given how finely tuned it is for life?
Finely tuned for stars, maybe, although that's debatable too.
Without design, the odds of a life-permitting universe are absurdly low, like 1 in the 10 to the 41st.
Yeah, there's actually no way to compute that because we don't know what values for the fundamental constants are actually possible.
Again, that's because the constants of the universe could have been anything.
How could you possibly know that? Maybe they could only be one thing.
And most possibilities make life impossible. Now, if we bring in the design hypothesis, a designer would have a reason to make the universe that supports life.
And if a creator wanted to create stars, they would have a reason to create a universe that supports stars. And that seems to be the universe we're in, a universe that supports stars.
And even if we're being insanely conservative and say that there's really only 1 in a billion chance that there is a designer and that they would choose a life-friendly universe, that's still way better odds than random chance.
But like I said before, we have no idea what the odds of this universe are. We don't have the information to compute that. And if you're going to talk about a creator, you need to consider the probability of having a creator that wants to make stars. There's presumably an infinity of possible creators. What are the chances we got one who wants to make stars? Maybe you begin to see that the idea of a creator doesn't really help you at all. If you're going to assume that there are an infinite number of possible universes with all different possible characteristics, a few that make stars, most that make nothing compatible with life, then you should make the same assumption for creators. There are an infinite number of possible creators, a few that make stars, and most that make nothing compatible with life as we know it. If you're assuming the probability of a creator wanting to create stars is, say, 1 in a billion, then why not just assume the probability of a universe that creates stars is 1 in a billion? It's all just complete speculation, and the creator idea gets you nothing.
And here's where the math gets fun. Even if you start with a very low prior probability of a designer, like 1 in the 10 to the 28th, the evidence of fine-tuning raises that probability, according to Bayes' theorem, to over 99.99%.
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to go through that math for me, otherwise I don't believe you. Explain your prior and conditional probabilities and how they compare to the non-creator scenario.
So no matter how skeptical you are at first, fine-tuning boosts the odds in favor of design being the best explanation.
Well, I think you definitely gotta show the math. It seems to me we have this situation. Let's say D stands for a designer who wants to create stars and is able to tune a universe for stars. Let's say S stands for there are stars, and the probability is 1 since there are in fact stars. This shows that the posterior probability of this type of creator, given that there are stars, is proportional to the product of the likelihood of stars given such a creator and the prior of there being such a creator. We take the likelihood to be 1 because that's how we've defined this creator as being willing and able to create stars. So we're left with the probability of such a creator given the evidence of stars being the prior probability of there being such a being. So it all seems to come down to the probability of a being existing who can manipulate the properties of a universe and who wants to make stars. Now, I just don't know how you compute the probability of such a thing, but it intuitively seems pretty remote. If you have different math, I'd be interested to see it. And if you want to talk about life rather than stars, then you additionally have to consider the probability that a creator who desired life would create a universe with so much death. Isn't it more likely the creator wanted to see death again and again and again and again? It might just be so amusing to that creator he just can't get enough of it. Does that sound like a creator you'd want to worship, I wonder?
So in short, the design argument isn't just some random guess or God of the gaps reasoning. It's backed by solid probability.
Is it? Have you done the math?
And that probability points to the idea that there is a cosmic designer, and that is what we mean when we speak of God.
Well, I found that very unconvincing, but I think it's interesting you showed Jesus there at the end because I find the description of creation in the Old Testament to bear no resemblance to what a fine-tuning creator would have been doing. Maybe we need a mathematical analysis to determine, given what we know of the bumbling, inept God of the Bible, what are the chances that this is the same guy who fine-tuned the universe? Seems like a really long shot to me, unless maybe the effort of fine-tuning the universe gave him some kind of aneurysm and he became a stupid and petty god. But anyway, to sum up, the appearance of fine-tuning is a really fascinating thing, and I hope we will get closer to understanding it in a naturalistic framework. But there can also be brute facts about the universe, and the appearance of fine-tuning for stars may just be one of them. I don't know, and I'm not afraid to say that, and I don't want to make up gods and beings and boogeymen to disguise the fact that I don't know. But I will be very excited if science can get to some explanation of why things appear this way, either based on the multiverse theory or based on deeper models of physics yet to come. But my sense is that there will always be unanswered questions, and the universe will never give up its mystery. I do hope to be proved wrong, however, because I don't really like mysteries.